Chambers. I'm a third-year MFA in the lighting design portion of the theater program, and I'm serving as the lighting designer for In the Blood.
How do you typically begin your design process?
The design process typically starts exactly the same for me every time, which is really just sort of a cursory reading of the script. And by cursory, I mean I'm not looking to immediately start cutting it apart and figuring out every little aspect of it, but I just want to get a sense of the story for it, right? As a designer, your eventual goal obviously is to figure out what your area can bring to telling that story, but first and foremost you have to try and approach it as an audience member would. In that case, often that is through just reading it for enjoyment and reading it to figure out what is going on and how can I feel like I'm getting something out of this, right? And then after that, more readings, more closely, then starting to think, turn on the lighting designer brain, right? Think about what the lighting is required for this, what lighting could be interpretation for the script. And then once that's established, it's visual research for me. It's finding images that aren't necessarily explicitly related to the script, but evoke the sense of it, that give me insight into the topics and the themes and the feelings that the script is dealing with. And then once that is all set, I would say then the beginning process is done, and then you're really focusing in and starting to work with the team on what the design is going to be.
What is something that you wish more people understood about lighting design?
Wish they understood? I actually don't know. I think part of the fun of theater is a little bit of illusion. The funny answer is because lighting designers are usually, or I shouldn't say designers, if you're running the light board at, say, a concert, and I have some experience with this, you're usually sort of in the back in sort of a soundproofed area, whereas if you're a sound designer, you want to hear what the room is like, and so you're out there, you're in it all. And there have been a lot of times where a buddy of mine running the soundboard has had an audience member come up and be like, I just love the lighting. And, you know, he says, thank you, I appreciate that, and then relays it to me. But no, I think that, yeah, a really great part about lighting is it's sort of ephemera. My undergrad instructor would always say, you don't notice good lighting. I think that's a little bit flippant, but it is mostly true. I think good lighting design sort of disappears and just becomes part of the world that you're experiencing.
Where did you find your initial inspiration for your designs for In the Blood?
So my initial inspiration for In the Blood was a couple of different things. So one was actually a photography series by a British photographer, Thomas Condret, who does a lot of photos of bodies in urban spaces, and particularly enclosed urban spaces. So a lot of like traffic tunnels and bridges and public transit stations and things like that. And what was really interesting to me about that was this blending of light physically, so the physical objects, the fixtures that make and produce light artificially, and then how those combined with the environment, right? These tunnels and these often very dingy sort of forgotten urban environments all mesh together, and then the actual light that is produced by these fixtures fills them in often really interesting ways, and there's a lot of interesting shadow play and dynamics, and in some ways decay that is sort of unique to light in environments like these, where particularly now with LED technology developing the way it is, the life of the light bulb is something that is sort of extended now over years and years and years. So to see places like tunnels where old fluorescents are sort of being left on their last legs, or sodium vapor lamps are still in practice, and seeing what that sort of decay process looks like was really interesting to me, and something that I wanted to try and bring into my design for In the Blood.
What elements of the play lend themselves to your design?
first and foremost is the location. So we have a really excellent set by one of our MFA students, Kate Cardinale, which is underneath a bridge inside a sort of drainage tunnel. And so the view that you have right there is this huge opening, right? This drainage tunnel with this looming bridge over the top of it. And immediately that starts to reference a lot of that lighting material I had, this idea of encapsulated and oppressive spaces and light sort of finding a way under the bridge naturally or physically being placed there with things like cage lights and safety lighting and utility stuff. And so environmentally speaking, that I think was really a great step and a good collaboration with her. But the other thing that I was really interested in was a lot of the play is dealing with the systems that are pressing and oppressing Hester. And I think there's an interesting parallel there where there is her attempts to sort of make and carve out a home in this inhospitable environment, and the light, be it the artificial light that's placed beneath the bridge and is sort of decaying slowly with the environment that just turns on when it's at night, or the sunlight under the bridge that is the primary source during the day, right? These are things that she has no control over, and though she tries to continually push and create this space where her family can exist, every aspect of the environment is sort of colluding against her. And I think that for me, that was why that lighting felt really appropriate.
How does the lighting evolve throughout the story of In the Blood?
So there are a couple of different, I'd say, sort of key gestures of the lighting. One being that sort of daytime where we have the sunlight poking through holes in the bridge and the railing and sort of flooding under. And then we have the evening where things like the street light or the lights under the bridge come on, and she's working in that environment. And then we have this sort of out of space and time set with these confessionals that some of the characters give, these monologues where they express the sort of deepest and darkest parts of themselves, where they explain the ways in which they have contributed to Hester's abuse and kept her down and in this position. And those, for a variety of reasons, wanted to feel very distinct and very different from the more realistic lighting of the day and night cycle. And so by plucking them sort of out of space and putting them in a really dark and isolated spot, it creates a sense that is, I think, really reminiscent of their titles, right? Confessionals. It is a private space where they express these feelings and these thoughts, and they themselves are really vulnerable in these moments. And then it makes that all the more challenging when they're done and they step out of it and they keep living their lives in a way that Hester doesn't have an ability to.
How does the story resonate within the context of the movement for Black lives and work for racial justice?
I think that it has a lot of parallels pretty clearly. There are these characters who are the other adults, sort of represent these other aspects of culture and society that are in various ways working to dehumanize Hester and to make her less than. Characters like the Reverend and the Doctor and Welfare are all both very literally and interpersonally damaging Hester. They all have relationships to her where they have really sort of actively done her wrong, but their names indicate what I think is really important for us to understand, which is that they stand in for systems as well, and they stand in for all of these sort of societal functions that have failed Hester and that have left her in this position where she is forced to fend for herself and to try and make a life for her and her children. And I think that, you know, you can extrapolate that out and think about the ways in which many poor people of color are put in these situations where the chips are down and the odds are stacked against them, and she can do everything right in her power, in her situation, and the one slip up she has at the very end is a monumental collapse that is really sort of brought about by the weight of all of these things she's had to bear coming and crashing down on her.
What are some of the challenges that you faced in designing during a pandemic?
One of the really sort of early on and chief ones was we were in the middle of our design meetings process right when our first lockdown hit back last March, and we all left Purdue for what was our spring break ostensibly and didn't come back. And I knew we weren't coming back, but there were just things I forgot when I went back home to stay with my fiance. And one of those things was I didn't bring any of my pastels or my art supplies. And so in the design process, I was teaching myself new pieces of software and like really learning how to use Photoshop as a lighting tool, just so I could develop renderings to share with the director and talk about what the lighting was going to look like. So there are the obvious things of our meetings all shifted online, and we all had to figure out that initial hump of how to conduct business in video chat rooms. But that was sort of a real one I look back on and I think, well, I did learn a new skill, right? I had to teach myself something, but at the same time, it was a real sort of struggle early on there to get to that point.
Aside from the pandemic, what has been unique about working on this production?
I think one of the things that's been really unique is working in this theater, which I haven't been able to do yet, the Mallet Theater. I have rarely been able to design in a black box space, and specifically one where we have a set like this with this bridge over top that creates all sorts of really interesting lighting challenges. And I think for me, what's really exciting about being a designer is solving that kind of a puzzle and getting a chance to work in really new and unique spaces. So it's been a really excellent challenge, but a challenge to be sure.
What are the differences in designing for a black box theater versus a proscenium theater?
So one of the key differences tends to be the way the seating is arranged in a flex space. So currently it's set up in a 3/4 thrust configuration, so audience on 3 sides of the scenery, and it sort of juts out into that middle space between them. What's kind of interesting though is because we won't really have a live audience, some of the things that you have to contend with are kind of out the window, right? Because typically one of the things you would think about if you're in a 3/4 thrust or a full round or a tennis court style is there are people watching it from really radically different angles, right? Even in the most sort of wide proscenium houses, everyone is essentially facing the action sort of dead on or at maybe like a 30-degree, 45-degree angle. But here you're dealing with people on sort of all sides of this action. So as the staging then dictates, actors are going to be sometimes standing with their backs or sort of 3/4 to one side of the audience at any given time. And so as a designer, you also have to consider that, right? And you have to think, much as a director does, about how do I compose a really interesting stage picture from all angles so that even if for a given instance, I'm not necessarily in the audience seeing everyone's faces all at once, I'm seeing something that is still really evocative and really well thought out and well conceived.
What has been an impactful discovery that you've had while designing for In the Blood?
I think a lot of it has come down to resources and ingenuity. This has been, for all sorts of reasons, the pandemic, the shift to online instruction, the change in just everyone's schedules overall, as well as it being my 3rd year and I'm designing 2 shows, a real sort of exercise in finding how I can best work as a designer. And it is a sort of a very personal thing, but understanding how to balance all of these different things and navigate sort of an ever-changing landscape has been something that again, it's a very valuable experience, even if it came for not the best reasons all of the time.
What is the sense or feeling that you want audiences to experience from watching In the Blood?
I think that I want the audience to obviously come away with it with something that they feel is valuable, and I think that can change depending on who you are. I think that it's important to remember that there's jokes in the play, and it's funny, and Hester is sort of, for all intents and purposes, really doing her best to raise her family. And I think that that's really the key to understanding just how tragic a lot of what happens in the play is that she is working so hard to give her children a good life, and the systems that exist around her make it, even the ones that are very explicitly meant to make it easier, make it more difficult, and make it so that her attempt to further them and to better them and to give them a good life is sort of fraught from beginning to end. So I think overall I'd want the audience to get a whole sense of the person, of Hester, of her family, and not to feel sort of oppressive dread for 90 minutes or however long the runtime ends up being, but to feel the highs and lows and the peaks and valleys of that journey, and to get a little bit of introspection into the way our society functions and the way it treats those of us who are in very unfortunate positions because of the way we have structured our social and cultural norms.
Thank you.
Of course.